Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. Today's Friday, November 7th, 2025, and we have the ostriches have been, well, I think the call has already started, but I think the call already started before people were told that the Supreme Court wasn't going to look at this whole thing anyway. And that's the suspicion from a lot of people on the ground. But that signals to me that the Liberals have everything well in hand. The NDP have come on side. They've got their de facto majority. And they do. And this budget's going to pass, and everything else is going to pass too. It's going to fall neatly in line with really not much opposition at all. And so they can move forward with impunity. It's far enough away from an election. It's far enough away from this budget fight. Everything's all done. They don't care. Go ahead. So that's interesting. We've got floor crossers and resignations to talk about as well. Motions of confidence, the budget stuff. NDP came on side, and we'll start there. Snap details withheld from the feds in the United States, and Trump's calling out the fraud. Still no riots for grocery stores, right? So very, very interesting there. There's a lot of waste to that program, and so this government shutdown is getting more and more interesting. Land claims back in Canada are exploding in BC and indeed across Canada now, although it's mostly limited to BC. But there are some Quebec and Ontario things that are kind of bubbling, and I've heard that that's not so good. And I don't think that there's legitimacy in this. I think this destabilizes our system more. I don't think that these land claims are legitimate. What happens at what point in history do you stop? There was a time period where Mohawks took over land from other tribes, for example, and then other tribes took over land from Mohawks. So who decides where that boundary is and why? And so why is that boundary valid and not my ownership that's current and the most recent? Why are we going back to whatever the land boundaries were in whatever period you prefer and saying that's prime for whatever reason? Why does that happen? And why can't these other First Nations people make land claims against you Mohawks, again, for example? And so it doesn't hold water. It's not valid. These people are just destabilizing our system. They're not looking at this in a fair and just way. This is communism, Marxist, crazy stuff on steroids. I've never seen anything like it, and I didn't think I would see anything like it in Canada, but here we are. And Wow. Talk about understanding history in a different way entirely. Because I often thought, how does a population one day just for no reason, right? How does that happen? And wow, I think I get it. So anyway, unbelievable stuff going on there. I've got an unbelievable series of crime tabs, home invasions, all sorts of crazy stuff later in the show with that. $1.3 trillion to fight climate change. The debt ceiling hiked to 2.8 trillion or something like that, which is just absolutely crazy. And a BBC reporter, no word of a lie, is getting in trouble for her facial expression when she had to say, pregnant persons or something like that. And she said women, bloody heck, right? And she made a facial expression that the broadcaster is now taking offense to. And I think that's absolutely, that's so 2025, it's not even funny. So there's a lot to get to. Let's get to it first. Global News is reporting these are matters of confidence, a Liberal government spokesperson said. So the Carney government's to face critical confidence votes Thursday last night, and they passed, and Friday. And so this budget's getting through. Everyone, it's terrible. It's awful. And I hate being right about things like this. I'm not surprised at all by this, but yeah, it's getting through. Glenn says the government House Leader Office tells City News Toronto that they have deemed these votes upcoming on opposition amendments to the budget to be matters of confidence beginning tonight. So it's a put up or shut up move, and the NDP has come on side. And Glenn says vote coming up in the House of Commons tonight. Looks like the Carney government will survive at least this week. NDP MPs will vote with the government on first confidence vote budget per Canada Press. So they're voting down the conservative amendments. And so there you go. So why would you vote down the conservative amendments if you weren't going to actually pass the budget? You wouldn't. That wouldn't happen. So here we are. And brave new world, right? I think they're going to try and drug us into submission. Cian Bexty is talking about the numbers in the House of Commons, and I'll clarify because he's incorrect here. Cian says, breaking, Matt Genereux resigned from Parliament, putting the Liberals one seat away from majority territory with his vacancy. What the F is going on? And so Genereux resigned, but it doesn't take effect until the spring. at the earliest, I guess. And if you listen to Michelle Ferreri, she's saying that he's just not running again next time. It's not that he's leaving Parliament, he's just not running again. And I think that's probably not correct. She was at a hockey game. Anyway, GM Forbes is sharing what Matt Genery says. He says, I want to be clear that there was no coercion involved in my decision to resign. All the newspapers were reporting that Pierre Poilievre basically blackmailed Genery to not cross the floor and to instead resign. And so he's saying, no, that's not what happened. That's not at all what happened. So that's where this comes from. He says, I want to be clear that there was no coercion involved in my decision to resign. I consider my colleagues in the Conservative Party very close friends, and I will miss them dearly. Since my resignation this evening, I had a great conversation with Pierre Poilievre, who wished me all the best, as I do him. I ran under his leadership in hopes that we could form a government that would offer hope to Canadians. I wish him and my colleagues all the best as they continue to raise the cost of living issues facing Canadians. To reiterate, this long-standing decision reflects my desire to spend more time with my family. My exact date of departure will be determined at a later date, but likely this spring. So there you go. That's different than what the news was reporting, right? And CTV News updated their article at 11:30 last night, and it says Conservative MP says he's resigning next spring, denies coercion involved in decision. So, the rumors are one thing and the reality is another thing. But here's the other floor crosser, and I think it's interesting how the media and this newly minted Liberal are almost colluding online or in real time to take down his former leader, right? What the question is very leading, right? Like it's here. Listen.
I know you just spoke of Mr. Poilievre and the direction he was going, but I'm just wondering whether the Conservative leadership style perhaps pushed you out of caucus.
Well, I think that's probably a part of it. I didn't find I was represented there. That my ideals of an Easterner, of a red Tory, quite honestly, of trying to find ways to find solutions and help your community rather than trying to oppose everything that's happening. And I think that's the opportunity that's being offered by Prime Minister Carney and the government caucus is to help find solutions at this critical time for Canada.
I know you just spoke of
I think it's funny, like, oh, could you tell us more things that you don't like about the Conservative leader? We'll love to write stories about it. Blacklock's reporter says Finance Canada seeks 20% hike in the national debt ceiling, third increase in 4 years to a record $2.54 trillion. Not a typo, trillion. That's with a T. So the years that we were talking about our budget in billions is over. I guess before it was in trillions as well, wasn't it? It was 1.8 or something like that. But they want to increase the debt ceiling to 2.4 trillion. Don't worry, we're good for it. It's fine. It's fine. We just want to borrow all of this money, and we're definitely not stealing from people. And we're definitely not completely incompetent that we can't make this work, right? Like we'll definitely pay it back when we figure out how to actually make money with all of this money-making stuff we have, like softwood and oil and all this stuff. When we figure out how to make money and stop running big deficits, but until then, we need to borrow money. So we keep electing people who are either completely incompetent or who are taking the money and doing something else with it. Because how much money do we owe? And that just keeps increasing, eh? And you want to increase the amount that the Canadian taxpayer owes so you can keep sending money to Ukraine? Am I understanding this correctly? Yeah? Okay. Weird. Here is Kim, and she says, my latest Financial Post column is out, and it takes aim at the November 4th, 25 budget that the government proudly billed as a generational investment. As I wrote, after 567 days with no federal budget, we finally got one, but perhaps the government should have taken 568 days to release a better one. Calling the out-of-control spending a generational investment is like calling a payday loan a wealth strategy. Look at all this. You walk into this store, you sign some paperwork, don't even read it. Who cares what it says, right? And then you sign that paperwork and they hand over all this money to you. Buddy, you're rolling in it. Take everybody out for dinner, right? And then you could do it the next day and the next day and the next day until they stop giving you money. Unbelievable, right? In the spirit of Sergio Leone's 1966 spaghetti western movie classic, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I break down the budget in the same style. The good, the repeat of the underused housing tax that was a debacle, progress on automatic tax filing. I've been calling for automatic tax filing for years. Automatic tax filing is a disaster. Like, I don't want to be paying for the government's mistakes because they've screwed up my taxes and they think my income is X when in fact my income is Y. And so they tax me on X, but I only make Y. And so I'm saying, no, that's not correct. Like, you're not right. And there have been horror stories of the government getting it wrong and people being punished by the government getting it wrong. And then who's correct, right? It's terrible. An explicit statement that the Canadian Entrepreneurs Incentive will not move forward, an overtly political initiative and ridiculous policy. The repeal of part of the luxury tax for airplanes and boats. However, it is not good that it was retained for automobiles, especially given the struggles that our domestic auto industry has been facing. The bad, no commitment to long overdue tax reform, more personal tax credits to clutter the system. And all these carve-outs and stuff make the tax system much more difficult to navigate. The deceptive budgeting technique of separating the capital expenditures from the operating budget is on full display. No new personal or corporate tax rate reductions. The projected total deficit for the current fiscal year is $78.3 billion. This is beyond reckless. The year's not over yet. People are expecting the actual real deficit to be closer to $100 billion. I think they've just calculated up to November. The public debt charges are expected to increase from $53 billion to $76 billion by 2029, 2030. Yikes, right? Like, that's not very good. By the time 2030 comes around, our country will be spending $1.46 billion per week in debt charges. Not enough spending cuts. The spending in this budget is eye-popping, $450 billion on a cash basis in overall new spending. Again, if you like government intervention, you'll love what the government is, quote, investing in. But to suggest the cuts described above are meaningful when you have this kind of spending is like saying you've lost weight when you've actually gained significantly. And finally, I concluded, in the end, this budget isn't a spaghetti western. It's a slow-motion fiscal shootout where taxpayers are the ones left holding the smoking gun. The good parts are minor cameos, the bad dominates the middle, and the ugly rides off with our future saddled in debt. If this is what passes for a generational investment, future generations may wish they'd been written out of the script. The budget is a train wreck and most certainly not transformational. Transformational in an absolutely terrible way, right? Let's talk about money, because this is grab bag of governance and money is name of the game as well. And then we've got the land rights stuff, which is just another debacle, which is being overseen by either incompetence or communists who know exactly what they're doing. Nicole says, so Danielle Smith, said Alberta was going to give the Carney Liberals the time until the budget was released to meet our demands. Well, the OG emissions cap was extended for 20 years. That's about it. Ball's in your court, Danielle Smith. So Danielle Smith's 12 demands to Mark Carney. Deadline, September 2025. September or November-ish, 2025, right? To avoid a national unity crisis. Oh, too late. Too late. Repeal C-69. Nope. Lift the BC taker ban. Nope. Scrap oil and gas emissions cap. Nope. End clean electricity regs. I don't think they've done that. Reverse plastics ban. They haven't done that. Cancel net zero. Although I have seen plastic straws around again, because the paper straws are terrible. They're absolutely terrible. Cancel net zero car mandate. I don't think they've done that yet. Return carbon tax to the provinces. Guarantee energy corridors. No export taxes on oil and gas. End equalization subsidies. Stop energy censorship. Nope. Fix Jasper and Banff mismanagement. They haven't done anything. They haven't done any of those things. So Danielle Smith is going to be piping mad, right? She's going to be super mad and she's going to do something about it. I wish that I was confident that was going to happen, but I'm not. Bruce says the GST no longer pays for all of the interest on Canadian debt. That's not so good, right? This is the real cost of our out-of-control federal spending, where tens of billions of dollars magically vanishes while our infrastructure and healthcare system collapses. Future generations of Canadians will be forced into poverty while paying interest on debt accumulated before they were even born, all while quality services diminish and foreign investment flees. While the GST was initially brought in, or when the GST was initially brought in, it was supposed to help Canada pay down our federal debt. So yeah, it's not doing that anymore. And so they're going to have to raise the GST, more taxes, because of bad policy and mismanagement. Here's Melissa Lantsman.
Interest payments on the national debt will cost Canadians $55 billion this year. That's more than this government spends on healthcare and more than it collects in GST. Every dollar that Canadians pay in GST doesn't go to doctors or nurses or hospitals. It goes to bankers. So why is the Prime Minister so determined to make sure that bankers get better care than patients?
Yeah! The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this budget preserves the health transfer to the provinces, over $29 billion. This budget puts $5 billion into health infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, this budget has the lowest net debt to GDP in the G7. It has the lowest deficit projected, and the cost of interest borrowed is lower than when the Conservatives were in government.
So
interest payments.
They're trying to justify this and say, oh, we're in good shape financially. I don't think we're in good shape financially. Here is Shanka, and he says, I don't know. He says, cargo crash. The global economy just broke. I don't know that it's that bad, but something to pay attention to. Right now, as you read this, 42% of shipping containers between China and America have vanished in 3 weeks, gone from 71 vessels to 41, below the 60-ship floor that held for 20 years. This is not a dip. This is a cardiac arrest of the $28 trillion trade system that feeds your stores, your jobs, your portfolio. November container volumes, 1.75 million units, down 19.2% year over year, the worst collapse since February 24. I didn't know there was a collapse in February 24. So, okay. China's export orders are contracting at 48%, the fastest drop since May. U.S. manufacturing orders sit at 49.4%, drowning below the 50 line, or 49.4, drowning below the 50 line that separates growth from contraction. The correlation is 0.9. When ships stop, factories stop. When factories stop, your paychecks stop. The trigger, tariff warfare crossed the Rubicon. Front-loaded inventory is exhausted. Reorder buttons stayed dark. Freight rates are softening despite peak season. The Baltic Dry Index just confirmed the bleed, down 10% in a month. Wall Street is asleep. U.S. stock trade at 23 times earnings, while international market sits at 17.8 times with better dividends and 11% growth rates. American retail giants sourcing 30% from China are about to report 10 to 15% earning downgrades by year end. The concentration risk is a loaded gun. The math is surgical. If vessel counts stay below 45 and factory orders remain underwater past November 21st, and we lose 0.5 to 1% of global GDP, that's the difference between soft landing and full recession. Every retailer, every importer, every goods-dependent stock is exposed. Services will decouple. Cash-rich companies will survive. Everything else faces compression. You have until November 21st to reposition. After that, the market reprices reality. The fuse is burning. The explosion guaranteed. Watch the ships. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's wrong. I don't know. There have been other times where ships are low, right? But this is going into the busy season. Very interesting is this economic force, and not necessarily just Canada, right? But economic force maybe applied against the United States to push them into a recession. Who knows? But there are a lot of levers that are being used by people who are very, very powerful to show just how much control they have, even if you want to be somebody who's going to, stand up for your nation and, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to go on our own and things like that. They'll crash your economy, right? After they kill you. So crazy stuff. Holly Doan says, pretty proud of my family's history on the farm in Manitoba. Relieved my brother and father did not live to see this foolishness. So BUAC says, do you wonder why they don't want to lend money to old white farmers, in quotes? Here is the CEO of Farm Credit Canada. Okay. She looks like a CBC character, like a caricature that would be on Sesame Street talking about letters and things, right, with Muppets. Justine Hendricks has held various positions at Export Development Canada over the past 16 years. She was named EDC's Senior Vice President and Chief Corporate Sustainability Officer, Sustainable Business and Enhancement in 2019. Her leadership is advancing the organization's 10-year strategy, ensured EDC continues to be a leader for Canada and its customers on environmental, social, and governance principles. Ms. Hendricks also designed and executed EDC's Net Zero 2050 strategy. So, right. And Holly Doan says Farm Credit Canada faces new federal scrutiny of its loan portfolio. Cabinet notice said it would review lending to Black, LGBTQ, and women farmers, noting farm industry is predominantly older white men. So we're not lending to those older white men. We're using DEI to justify lending only to this group of people. Crazy town. This is something just to keep in mind with regard to business slowing and other things slowing. When the inputs increase in price, it makes widgets hard to manufacture. So like if it previously cost, if my margins on this are like 5%, right? And it previously cost $3 to make this thing, and now it costs $5 or $7 to make this thing, I have to price accordingly, increasing the price of it to keep my margins the same, to make manufacturing this thing achievable, right? But if you can't increase the price, or the consumers don't pay the price at the same level, then you might not have a business anymore. You might just have bills. So that's a risk. And if you're not diversified, right? Like if you have just one product, you could go under. And so it's just it's all of these little cuts that all of this inflation, and it's all by design. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like they're putting policies in place to make this better. It feels like they're putting policies in place to silence anybody who notices. And I laugh, but it's true. Matt Goodwin says, if energy is cheap and reliable, industry can function. If it is expensive and unreliable, industry contracts, which is what we're seeing. It's expensive and unreliable, right? Wind just doesn't do it. This is a basic precondition that determines whether an economy grows or declines. It really is that simple. Yup. Here's CBC Watcher, and he's talking about no bottom to the EV money pit. Officials say that massive electric vehicle battery plant under construction near St. Thomas will require about $400 million in upgrades to the local water system, a cost the municipal water supplier says can't be covered without help from the Ontario government, Volkswagen, or a massive increase to ratepayers. The power company plant, or the PowerCo plant, running at full capacity and its supporting industries, would consume about half of the 91 million liters of treated Lake Erie water provided every day by the local water system, says Peter Barbo, who chairs the Elgin Water Area Supply System Board of Management. They're just figuring this out now. They've already poured the concrete. Right? This is not so good for anybody involved. 21 minutes. I want to talk about the land stuff, but it might take longer than the 4 minutes that I want to cut the stream off at. So I should cut the stream off now, really. CTV News is reporting, majority of Americans think Canada is negotiating in good faith. No, they don't. No, they don't. This is just propaganda nonsense. But Joseph says, the facts speak otherwise. This isn't a trade war. This is an ideological war. Japan's prime minister was able to get a trade deal within a week of being elected. Mexico avoided trade increase tariffs. Trump is the opposition to globalism. Carney is globalists' poster boy. And so there's a break there, definitely. So unfortunately, I'm going to say goodbye to the stream.